have no idea what you're looking for. You 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 have no idea what you're looking for.
This is madness.
You have no idea what you're looking for.
Recall what they throw.
Welcome back to the Droids You're Looking For, a Star Wars podcast. Alongside Chris and Sam, I am Ryan. Mike, unfortunately, not with us today, but he will be back next week. He's off trying to find Thanos and the Infinity Stones. It's a fun, laid-back episode today, we think. There's not much news, so we're just hanging out, catching up with the Bouncy Boys. Guys, how's the week going?
Oh, it's going good. It's been kind of a Star Wars-fueled week for me. I was buzzing a little bit from Celebration and our chats last week, so I did myself a little watch of all the changes between the originals and the revisions.
Wow. That's thorough. Yeah. I also want to say I realized that my wording may have sounded strange. I didn't mean to imply that it's going to be a laid-back, fun episode in Mike's absence. We're actually sad to not have Mike with us.
Right.
It'll surely be a disorganized episode.
Right, we're just directionless now. There's that.
we're flying without a rudder.
So our laid backness.
Do you fly with a rudder?
We're
sailing without a rudder.
You boat without a rudder, but there's a rudder on an airplane, isn't there?
I think all of the flying in Star Wars is kind of boat adjacent, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like nautical.
Sure, and I know famously in Joss Whedon's Firefly they refer to spaceships as boats. So welcome to the Whedon cast.
Hey, there you go. Hey, do you think
Joss
if Paul
Whedon,
Rudd,
famous for the Avengers movies?
Do you think if
That's
Paul
true.
Rudd had a boat, he'd name it Paul Rudder?
You know, Chris, I really do. I really do. I like that we're assuming that Paul Rudd doesn't have a boat.
Yeah, he hasn't named it that.
Interesting news this week. This is all but confirmed. It's not really, that consequential, but I thought it was interesting that apparently George Lucas was consulted by J.J. Abrams and Chris Terrio when they were writing Episode 9 to find out what his original ideas were for it. So that could explain the Emperor returning, because famously George Lucas has claimed, or sources have claimed, that George Lucas's idea for the third trilogy in the trilogy was that there would be a return of the Emperor.
Oh,
so
it was a prequel about the Emperor, trilogy about the Emperor growing up.
Yeah, in the middle. So between Episode 9, Part 1 and 2, there's going to be a Emperor trilogy.
Do you?
Well, I was reading
a Palpa
actually.
Trilogy.
Ooh.
I pulled up. There's a quote here from Chris Terrio that I'm just gonna about this that I'm just gonna read. It says he's speaking here, and he says quote, we had an idea for a script. It was very much set in the world of espionage and subterfuge. I had an idea, so I needed to ask George if there were screenwriters in the Star Wars universe.
Interesting. What does that mean?
Was that a bit?
That was supposed to be that he was writing Argo in Star Wars. Stargo Wars.
Sorry, Sam.
I hope that
you went for it, though. Honestly, a tip of the cap to Sam. He went for it.
He committed.
You committed
Argo,
to that?
force yourself, Sam.
There it is. Wow, you got me.
I hope that every listener that we have is as silent as the two of you during that pause.
Well, I don't.
I literally said,
I'm not
what
sure
does
Argo
that
is
mean?
left. Well, first off, it wasn't established to the audience that Chris Terrio was the screenwriter of Argo.
Right.
Of course, we knew that, but also, I think you were overestimating the cultural footprint that Argo has left, but maybe not.
Hey, you never know. Wow,
that's my Batman.
So I think that was interesting. I like to hear that. I like to hear George's involvement.
Yeah, I mean, I
in these
think
things when they call Dad on in to come help the kids shoot their movie.
I think it's good. It gives you that. I mean, he sold it, right? It doesn't mean he's creatively has to be legally out of it. Like he's allowed to participate in this.
He could direct one if they want him to.
So I think it's a good thing, and I like to see him around. And he also did a little bit of Game of Thrones the other week, so which is very bizarre.
I feel like that was like very overblown. Like they were like he helped direct when like the story was essentially went up to him and he was like, "Oh, good job, everybody."
But it is still pretty crazy to see George Lucas like on a film set doing something like he.
I'm pretty sure he just showed up and told Khaleesi how she'd pick up her cape.
I heard every movie George Lucas visits the set and says to do one thing.
Do you guys, in earnest, do you guys think that George Lucas will ever direct a movie again?
I don't know. I was looking at Brian De Palma has a new movie coming out, and I saw the trailer for it, and I noticed this with a lot of like older directors that were big in like the 60s and 70s. When they make movies now, they look like they're shot on like VHS tape. I feel like we might see George Lucas do kind of like his own, like, well, I have enough money just to get all the equipment, I'll just shoot my own. And we might see something like that. It's like a short.
I think he'll. I don't think he will direct a feature again. I think let me back up on that. I think the only way is I think that Steven could bring him back.
Oh,
I think that if Steven Spielberg said. Sure. Like I think George, I could see Steven Sondheim. I think Steven Spielberg could show up one day and make a press release and say, we haven't seen an original picture from my friend George since Red Tails.
Oh yeah,
and I told him he needed to get out. He was robbing the people, of his great talent.
What about some kind of
I could see that.
Like some kind of update of of American Graffiti set in the 90s,
starring Ron Howard.
Still starring Ron Howard.
Well, there's no way Lucas does anything set in the 90s. Are you kidding me?
Well, listen here. It's people go after George a lot because they didn't like the prequels, or whatever, and we're actually going to get into that a little bit. But he is a tremendous talent, and it would suck if he just doesn't do anything with that for the remainder. And God knows that if he just wants to ride this out for he's given us more than we deserve. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah, sure.
But I would love to see him. He said that he wanted to do experimental movies, and then Star Wars kind of took over. Him and Francis Ford Coppola both have this weird thing where they it happened into this wild success, and they were like, this isn't even really what I wanted to do.
Which is wild, and then Coppola was making all those kind of home movies for a while.
Yeah, you mean like Tetro and things like that? Yeah.
I would love to see, I would love to see him a collaborative film. I think the biggest thing, I don't know that George Lucas has had, another story as compelling, as exciting, as original. Since Star Wars, maybe Indiana Jones, I know that was him and Steven Spielberg coming up with that. I'm talking like I know the guy, like we're buds, like my boy Stevie. But I guess I'd be super interested if someone had a really great idea for a new world, something like with world building and great characters and a hero's journey, and they could somehow pitch it to and get George Lucas excited about it, then I'd love to see him co-direct or have or direct a script written by somebody else, but that he has influence to design and world build and flesh out the his stories are good. It's his sort of scripts that I have a problem with, I guess.
I've been on a YouTube bender, just kind of going through old interviews of his and things like that, and I've noticed that the thing that everyone says, and we've kind of made fun of it on the pod a few times, is when he walks into a room with 4 different drawings and then he just knows the one to pick. It'd be cool to see him in a scenario like you kind of mentioned, to do that, where it's from the mind of George Lucas and then whoever else directs stuff. I guess that's kind of what's happening now.
I'll tell you who I think of, and I don't know if Ryan, if you'll agree or if you'll laugh at me for this, but I think of Zack Snyder should be an art director, and maybe George Lucas should be a producer, but producing art director type role, you know, because it's like I think both of them like are like have super strong aesthetics and like great sort of design ideas and like great ways of thinking about visual design and visual storytelling. And so like, yeah, I'd love to see that. It's whenever, I guess with George though, I also like him as a director. I think like Zack Snyder as a director, like is where he gets himself into trouble. It's like more than he can handle.
Yeah, see, I don't even agree with the Zack Snyder thing in terms of him being a good visual storyteller. I've had this conversation. I mean, I think
designer, not visual storyteller.
Well, I even disagree with that concept. And I mean, this isn't the Zack Snyder cast, and I don't mean to pile on Zack Snyder, but like, he certainly has talents. But people always talk about, like, I've heard a lot of people say that like he should just be like a visualist, you know, like he should be a DP or he should be, like you said, a designer. And in terms of him specifically, I don't think that his visual style or eye is particularly advanced or good. I think it's just distinct. But like, I don't think that necessarily, like, just because something looks like a Zack Snyder movie and you know that it is a Zack Snyder movie doesn't mean that like that's good. You know, like, it's like, I think that all of his movies look like sludge. Like, they all look like the same kind of sludge, but it's just like, I can't, and I don't mean this in the, like, action way where it's like, it's going too fast or, like, there's too much chaos. I mean, literally, like, in terms of, like, contrast of color and, like, exposure, I can't tell what's going on in a frame.
I don't entirely. I guess I sort of got us way off track here. Like, I don't disagree with that.
We're the bouncy boys. We're bouncing around.
We're the bouncy boys.
I don't disagree with like I do think the actual like cinematic storytelling, like his on-screen visuals, I think are a little bit overrated. I'm talking about like, and I think you said you also disagree with this, but like purely from a like design aesthetic, like I like what he did with like how like what he did in terms of design for Krypton and what he did for the actual like Batcave and Batman gear in those movies and stuff.
But I guess
was, like, all in the art direction stuff, and you know, but it's like it's when he started then actually directing it, it was like, oh yeah, I wish this were a little more.
But like, to me, it's like what you were saying about like George going in or what Chris was saying about George going in and picking the picture. Like, so Zack Snyder did it, like, that means he has a really good art director. Do you know what I mean? Like, he didn't design those things. He just like picked them.
Yeah,
which
maybe.
isn't to be. I'm not trying to diminish that role in something, because obviously George Lucas didn't design the Star Wars world. You know, like, there's tons of people that did that. He was the person at the helm that was like, this is going here, and like, that's what a director is to do. But I guess, yeah, we're off track. But I do think that George Lucas is an astounding director, even if like you don't like his writing or the way he deals with actors. Like, there's no one else who's made movies the way he has. You know, like, it's like, and that's, I rewatched the prequels recently, and I've always said this about them. There's a purity to them. It's like a person's vision executed, and obviously there was a lot of collaboration, like with designers and stuff, but like, it is what it looks like when someone is like not beholden to anybody. And there's something like so interesting about those movies in that way, because it's just like exactly what he wanted to do.
Yeah. And
like, that's thrilling to see, even if you don't like what he did.
Right.
It's like, so rarely do we get to see something on that scale.
It's nuts. Like, yeah, you're absolutely right, and he pulled it off. Like, that's even the greater accomplishment. Like, he did it.
Yeah, like, he paid for it, and he's like, I'm going to do whatever I want.
Here's an interesting side note. I didn't have much to contribute to the Zack Snyder battle, but I was looking at the
Ryan and I aren't on speaking terms anymore.
Chris, can you tell Sam that it wasn't a battle?
Sam, it was not a battle. It was. I was trying to think of the line from 300. What's one of the what's he scream?
I don't know. This is Sparta.
This is. I was gonna say it wasn't a battle. This is Sparta. The George Lucas has made a few like little documentaries, and one of them, coincidentally, is named The Emperor. and it's about a disc jockey, Emperor Bob Hudson, who bases his show on the idea that radio is a fantasy. So I have to imagine that played into part of creating the character named the Emperor.
Is this a bit? Is this an Argo bit?
I swear to you, this is a real thing. I went to his IMDb while you were chatting, and it was like, because we were talking about like what has he made sense, and Star Wars was the last film that he actually directed. Everything else he's produced, and so they gave some short documentaries, and The Emperor is one of the documentaries. I want to watch this now.
Well, stay tuned for the podcast where we review The Emperor. George Lucas's short documentary.
We should do a watch of all of George Lucas's materials and see if there is Star Wars connections.
I have yet to see THX and American Graffiti for that matter. So
wow.
Yeah.
I've never seen either of those.
Oh,
I would be down, absolutely.
Two gems right there. I watch American Graffiti at the start of every summer because it's the perfect summer movie.
I would be super curious to see, like, the guy, you don't hear much from him anymore, but it's like, I'm so curious. It's like, do you want to direct another movie? If so, like, what do you want to make? Because I'm sure, like, every day he gets a voicemail from each of the studios asking those questions.
Right.
Well, could you imagine if it was like the new film from George Lucas? It'd be like such a strange, like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I hope he does. I hope he does. I don't care what it is. I really hope that he directs another movie.
Well, it's certainly,
I think it'd be interesting.
It's certainly going to be harder for him now. He doesn't have a studio.
Well, he couldn't get all of his usual people. I mean, I'm sure Rick McCullum is available, but
I mean, like, I guess he could still probably self-finance anything he possibly wants.
Yeah, he could just start another company.
Yeah.
Lucas movie.
George Arts.
I want to see him work with. I want to see him and Guillermo del Toro come up with something together.
Oh my God.
A Spielberg-produced Guillermo del Toro Lucas film about the Emperor.
Directed by Jon Favreau. Starring Ron Howard. So I recently, after Celebration, we started watching, after the trailer came out, we started watching episode 1 at Chris's house. And I got the bug. I was like, I got to watch the prequels again. Here's an interesting fact. I didn't own the prequels on any kind of high-definition device. I didn't have the digital versions. I didn't have a Blu-ray.
This is insane to me.
This is insane. This is like Sam not watching Last Jedi fully twice.
I have the DVDs, so I'll
get to it.
I decided now's the time. I'm buying the prequels on Blu-ray, and this weekend I watched all of them again. And I got to tell you, boys, I have a new ranking.
Wow.
I have a new ranking.
Let's hear
So
it.
excited.
And I'm saying it's this. It's 584376162. 584376162.
Do not call that number, listeners.
Here it is. It used to be 584376121.
Oh, so 1 used to be less. So you've moved one up 3 spots.
1 has made a huge jump.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I finally came to terms with the fact that Return of the Jedi may be closer to the bottom of my list. That's okay, because the worst Star Wars movie is still my favorite thing in the world.
That's a very good way.
But I
of
will
looking
say
at it.
this: I think Phantom Menace aged better than I thought it did. So, Sam,
Okay.
I give that to you.
Yeah.
You were always
Hey.
a defender.
Always, man. But I'm glad you're. Look, this isn't a time to gloat. I'm glad you're seeing it in a new light. That's delightful to me.
Well,
I
that's
love
the
that
thing.
movie.
What a gift that was to me, that I liked it more than I thought I did. That's great. Episode 2, I started seeing the seams more, but I still enjoyed it thoroughly. Episode 3, to me, I love it so much. Because even to the point that my real ranking might be 58347162.
5834.
Oh, boy.
More than A New Hope.
No.
5834.
Can we just? All right. First of all, can we stop calling it a New
I
Hope?
love your
It's
Paul
called
Schrader
Star
routine.
Wars.
Not Paul Schrader. Wait, Paul Schrader? No. Who's Letterman's guy? Paul Schaefer.
Paul Schaefer.
You're doing a
Ah.
5843.
58.
5843. So yeah, I think so. Episode 3 to me works on almost every level. Obviously, I know that the acting is kind of wooden, but I think that it has a real sense of tragedy. I think that once the turn happens, it's phenomenal, and I just think it rocks.
Do you know there was? Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say the zeitgeist kind of feeling at that time was like, all right, people. There was maybe a harsh reaction to 1. 2, people lost interest, and then 3 was like a surprise. Like, this is just a decent movie, and I think that I had the best feelings coming in and out of 3, but I felt like I had the least amount of people to enjoy it with because it wasn't like the goodwill had been eaten up until now.
Also, 3 has. I was speaking about this story recently, and if I may, tell a nice Star Wars in the world story.
Sure.
So I went to a very large high school. The graduating class was 1,200 kids. So, people, the staff didn't really know everybody. But the principal I knew of, he certainly didn't know me. But I knew him. He was a very straight-laced kind of dude. Or he might have been a vice principal. He was a high-up, or the administrator. Maybe he was the principal's boss. Anyway, he was a high-up, very straight-laced dude. He wore tweed jackets. He was probably in his 60s. And I went to Best Buy the day that Episode 3 came out on DVD because I had to have it that day, of course. I was going to go home and watch it. And I'm standing in line, and I turn around, and I see, oh, my God, it's the administrator from my high school. It's the boss's bosses. And I look in his hand to see what he's buying, and he was buying Episode 3 on DVD.
Wow.
He went, like me, right after school to go buy Episode 3. And I thought, That's magical.
That's common ground. That's what Star Wars does.
I didn't look at him. I didn't make eye contact. We never spoke of it. He didn't know who I was,
Ryan
Because
got
I was a
out of
good little
summer
boy.
school.
Yeah, he got me. He got all those detentions and suspensions off my permanent record.
Right. Then you graduated.
I've seen.
I graduated.
You graduated.
I've seen Ryan's permanent record.
I couldn't think.
It's
What is it?
questionably clean.
Magna
cum laude?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, in high school, I
Yep.
graduated magna cum laude
Yep.
in high school.
I don't. I think Episode 3 is probably the one I've seen the least.
No,
I did not go see it opening
Episode
weekend.
8.
By the
is
time-
the movie you've seen the least.
Oh, that's
We've
okay.
established.
Let me
good,
rephrase.
very
Let
good.
me rephrase. Let me
We've
rephrase.
established this.
Wait,
Of
that
all
means that
the-
he hasn't seen Episode 3.
Say,
Let me.
are you? Is this an
no, no.
admission?
I misspoke.
Is
I
this an
misspoke.
admission of omission?
You guys, I misspoke. I don't know what happens in Episode 3, Return of
my
the
gosh.
Gremlins.
Oh no, you thought of.
It's
no.
the Gremlins, right?
Yep, we're talking Gremlins 3.
Yeah.
No, so I clearly misspoke. Of the Star Wars movies that I've seen countless times, that one is the one I've seen the least of those, because I've only seen the most recent ones one time each. But Episode 3, I didn't see it when it came out. Opening weekend, I went, it was a busy time for school, so I went a couple weeks later when there was I had a half day or something. I went after school and nobody wanted to go with me, so I went to see the movie alone. I remember just feeling like it was, at the time, I thought the best of the prequels, but it was just such the whole I think I was very much of the majority thinking on the prequels at the time, where I was like, these didn't feel right. They didn't feel like what I expected, or like Star Wars to me. I couldn't get excited about them. It felt generally kind of disappointing. It definitely has moved up a lot. Now I think, Episode 2 is at the bottom of my list, but I don't know, man. I think The Phantom Menace is just, that's the one I love as a movie.
Yeah.
Is it the Anakin story that compels you so much, Ryan? or?
Are you talking about in Revenge of the Sith?
Yeah.
I think that, so there's that element, and there's also the world element. I think that they nailed it the most in that one, that you have a true sense that big events are taking place in this world that are like shifting the tide. So there's a real sense of dread building, and then when it all concludes, I feel like there's a real sense of tragedy about it. I think that the tone is nailed. I think that while, the acting is prequelish, like it's what it is, it's also like the most functional, I think, in that one.
Yeah.
Like if you look at like what George Lucas is trying to do, where he's trying to make this like populist thing that it's like he's essentially making a movie for kids, even though obviously there is some dark stuff in it, but he wants it to be just like base level, like easily understood. Like he's not going for nuance in terms of emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think that you can obviously disagree with that on a taste level. However, it can't be denied that it is like an aesthetic choice on his part. He's not like a stupid person. He knows that like this is not what natural acting is. You know, it's like it's just not what he's going for.
No,
he's going for this very functional, like it is on the surface. We know exactly, like there's not subtext to emotions.
And I think that it helps. I feel like that also helps like world build also. It's like, I know you want to connect with the characters, and I know you want to feel like the same emotional stakes you do, but sometimes having that like kind of slight disconnection really makes it feel like you're kind of viewing a different place.
That's a really good point. That's interesting, and I agree. Because
I mean,
not to be like dismissive, but like they are acting like not quite human,
right? And like you think about it, it's like maybe that's the reality of that world, for intentional or not. I think it helps add to the just kind of that strangeness factor,
and also that people acted, because in the original trilogy it's a little more naturalistic, and there could be an argument made that he wanted to portray that in the older times that there was more of a formality to the way people behaved.
Yeah, I mean, he was definitely you see that definite like 20 and 30s influence, and it's like, all right, if these are told a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, the prequels are essentially, they're like archive films. Like if you're making them to map off of a decade, it's like if we watched a movie from the 1930s now, I don't even know what a movie from the 1930s. We'd watch that and we'd be like, these people are acting so strange.
Yeah, absolutely.
I hear what you're saying. I think it's totally. I think we're getting into like the thing of like art analysis, where it's like, well, yeah, if you see it, it's there. Does intent matter? I mean, I think like Ryan, I think you're correct in that it's like, I definitely think George Lucas knows what he's asking of his actors. I don't think he's naive and thinks like that they're giving grounded real world performances, in the prequels. But I also think like you guys might be giving a little like too much credit if you're supposing that like he wanted it to feel like a picture from the 30s where the acting would be appropriately stilted because this was from 30 years before the original Star Wars we saw and stuff. Like it's like, okay. I don't know.
Well, how about this though for a different reading of this? Because I understand what you're saying. But so in terms of and again, this is a choice. So it's like it may not be something that someone agrees with, but so George Lucas, I think it'd be hard to argue that he's like not an artist. Like George Lucas is clearly an artist. So
absolutely.
And I'm gonna borrow something from Grant Morrison, the comic book writer. I heard him talking on Kevin Smith's podcast once about how Frank Miller did a book after The Dark Knight Returns called The Dark Knight Strikes Again, I believe.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. And there's some art in there that is like
it's
bad.
Wild. It's wild.
And it's like it's clearly like he drew it in like 10 seconds, and like people were like, Frank Miller's like lost it. Like this is bad. And Grant Morrison makes the argument that it's like Frank Miller is an artist and he is controlling where your eye is going. So if he looks like he did not spend time on a panel, it's because that's not what he wants you to be looking at.
Mm-hmm.
So I think with George Lucas, with the Star Wars prequels, I think that, again, you could disagree with this and say that it's distracting and takes you out of the movie. He's choosing an aesthetic where he's saying like, so the acting and like specifically the dialogue is not what I want you to be looking at.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not what he's focusing on. Now, I understand that like that is distracting And like I would prefer it if there was more of a natural acting style in the prequels, but I do think it's an interesting choice and like an uncompromised way of making a movie.
I agree with that completely. Like, I do think it's intentional. I think that's what he's going for.
I mean, he states that if you listen to the DVD commentary for episode 1, he literally almost verbatim says that.
Right.
Does he really?
He says something to the extent of like, "Oh, Star Wars are always more of a visual movie, anyhow."
That's funny.
Yeah.
I think there's something interesting, like, as I'm running through these prequels in my head. I mean, I just watched, as you mentioned, episode 1. Held up for me. It's still my favorite prequel. I love it, especially, like, after the panel. I was just, like, just all the more, like, impressed by sort of, again, it's like, to me, it's like, that's the most original Star Wars we had until The Last Jedi, you know, like, since Star Wars. So it's like, I do really love that movie. But thinking of the prequels, the one thing that I think I'm going to have to rewatch the episodes 2 and 3 now, because in my mind, I always think of how great Ewan McGregor's Obi-Wan is in Revenge of the Sith. And he's like what really pulls me into that movie. And I'm, of course, thinking specifically of like the final scene, the lightsaber battle, and the really like emotional confrontation between him and Anakin. But what I'm realizing now in my head is like, I actually think Obi-Wan has a more interesting storyline in Clones, which is and like more to do in Clones, which is my least favorite prequel. And I'm just, I think, sort of tricked by like, I don't know, there's episode 3 being a more like all in, better, fuller, satisfying story, you know?
I think it's also, it could have been at the time too, just like, what could George Lucas get away with, like producing his own film before audiences like really turn, you know what I mean? Like one is what is a little more kind of bridging that old world aesthetic and our filmmaking and kind of getting into the digital sphere, and then 2 was like this complete digital take. So he was kind of like, well, what if I push it to its furthest? And I think 3 is kind of where he found the sweet spot.
I think you're right. I mean, well, I don't know. I think like the first one still is my favorite, like in terms of like visually and the like, I like the use of the real world. I think 3 is definitely stronger than 2. Mm-hmm. You know, but except for, oh man, Ewan McGregor's like hair and beard in the third one.
He nails it.
He looks so good.
That is one, just like, the surprising fact of these prequels, and as a Star Wars fan, the most surprising thing is that I feel like there's a point in time, and I felt this with TV shows like Seinfeld, where they didn't hold water. Like they felt out of date and out of place, and like didn't hold up, and then somehow they come back, and then you're like, oh yeah, this is just great. And I don't know if that's me as a person changing, or like if there's some kind of objectiveness to that, or if it's the time, but I feel like now is the time the prequels are back in good graces.
I think that's definitely, there's a big movement happening. I don't know if it's related to like, I hope it's not, because the new movies are like splitting certain parts of fandom the way they are, you know, that it's like people are just like retreating back. I hope that it's just genuinely the sort of lens of time. And when you look at other movies from, you know, 99 is a great year, but like when you look at other movies from, what was it, like 02 and 05, and how they've aged, you know, obviously there's some great movies in every year, but like the prequels like actually hold up in their respective years, maybe much better than they did when you had some expectation that was being disappointed, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's it. Without it kind of goes back full circle here, Ryan. Without that anticipation, anxiety, and watching these movies kind of free, knowing what happens, I think it's a better experience. Star Wars, like all the meals we equate it to, just get better with age.
We're lucky to have it, boys.
Hold on. I want to push back on the idea that every meal gets better with age.
Yeah, like
that's not
like a sandwich, like a hoagie.
I love my 14-day-old hoagies. That's a 2-weeker for you.
We're lucky to have it. We're lucky to get to live in that world sometimes.
Absolutely. Well,
guys, what a great, you know what? The Bouncy Boys pulled through.
we did.
I thought this was a great discussion about art.
I liked
the nature
it.
of art.
Yeah.
Star Wars.
George
Right,
is,
And
George is
anything to kill the time until Endgame.
Yeah, man.
That's
Well,
right.
I'm sure for the folks who really enjoyed our little divergence down the Marvel road,
They weren't
we will
little.
definitely
Longest
do
episode.
some. We will definitely do some sort of wrap up post Endgame coverage just to talk about it. I'm sure it'll be spoilerific, and we will appropriately warn folks just in case by the time we get that up they haven't seen it. But we're gonna keep talking Star Wars here. This isn't a Marvel cast, but we'll close that loop for sure.
Infinity Stones.
As always, follow us on Twitter at DroidsPod, Instagram at DroidsPod, email us droidspod@gmail.com.
Yeah. You nailed it.
And
Mike,
Facebook, the Droids Podcast.
Follow Ryan.
Just Google us. Just look it up.
Follow Ryan on Twitch at Ryan Droids Pod.
Yeah, Ryan Droids Pod on Twitch. I recently discovered a bug in KOTOR that I'm trying to figure out. So there's been some delay.
Okay.
And also go to my YouTube channel, Coping Mechanics, where I talk about anxiety in video games.
There you go.
I think you should just put up the glitch streams.
Yeah, that'd be kind of fun.
Where my mouse just stops functioning. Yeah, I'm sure
Cool.
people would love that.
Hey, if you know
Well-
how to fix a non-functioning mouse.
Yeah,
Right
just let us
in.
know.
Right in.
droidspod@gmail.com. Until next time, I hope you all survive the snap, and we're in the end game now.
What they throw.
Andy. You boys want to go to medieval Endgame?